On the morning of February 24, 2023, police responded to a 911 call from a quiet suburban neighborhood in Herndon, Virginia. Inside, they found a gruesome scene. 37-year-old pediatric nurse Christine Banfield had been stabbed 7 times in the neck. In an upstairs bedroom, 39-year-old Joseph Ryan lay dead from 2 gunshot wounds. Christine's husband, Brendan Banfield, was found kneeling over her body. Both he and the family's 20-year-old au pair, Juliana Peres Magalhães, told officers they walked in on a violent intruder attacking Christine and shot him in self-defense. Banfield was uniquely qualified to handle a crime scene. As a federal law enforcement officer for the IRS, he was trained in the mechanics of criminal investigations and the weight of forensic evidence. But the evidence didn't match the story of a desperate struggle. Forensic analysts found absolutely none of Banfield's DNA on the knife used to kill his wife, only DNA belonging to Christine and the man found dead upstairs. Investigators discovered that while Joseph Ryan was a stranger to the family, he hadn't broken in. Digital records showed he had been specifically invited to the house that morning. These 2 details, the missing DNA and the invitation, forced investigators to look past the physical evidence in the room and into the husband's digital life. Banfield was having an affair with the au pair. Prosecutors say he refused to divorce Christine because he feared a legal battle would cost him custody of their 4-year-old daughter. To remove Christine from the picture, Banfield and the au pair created a fake profile on a fetish website, using Christine's photos to pose as her online. They used this persona to target Joseph Ryan, promising him a highly specific sexual role-play encounter that would take place at the Banfield home. The trap relied on a specific instruction. Ryan was told to bring his own knife for the encounter. This solved the husband's biggest forensic problem. By making the target provide the weapon, Banfield ensured the blade could never be tied to his own history. Ryan wasn't just a scapegoat. He was manipulated into delivering the weapon that would be used to kill Christine and frame himself for the crime. On the morning of the murders, Banfield, the au pair, and the couple's 4-year-old daughter waited in a car outside for Ryan to arrive. Ryan stepped inside, believing he was beginning the consensual role-play he had been promised online. Instead, Banfield shot Ryan, seized the knife Ryan had brought with him, and used it to murder his wife. To solidify the self-defense alibi, the au pair then shot Ryan a 2nd time, allowing both of them to claim they had used deadly force against an intruder. During the entire confrontation, the couple's 4-year-old daughter remained in the basement of the home. Banfield used his professional knowledge to manufacture a justifiable homicide, layering physical violence over digital deception to hide the murder of his wife. The plan's mechanical success was its ultimate undoing. By keeping his DNA off the knife so perfectly, Banfield provided proof that the struggle he described to police never actually happened. 8 months later, the au pair was arrested. She pleaded guilty to manslaughter and gave a full account of the months of planning and the fake online profile. In 2026, a jury in Fairfax County convicted Banfield on 2 counts of aggravated murder, as well as firearm and child endangerment charges. Judge Penny Esgarate described the case as a reflection of evil, highlighting the cruelty required to lure an innocent man into a deadly trap. Banfield was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The motive for the plot was to keep his daughter, but the result was the opposite. One parent is dead, the other is in prison for life, and the child they both claimed to protect is now left with neither.
Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a case that literally sounds like a Hollywood thriller, but it is entirely tragically real. We're breaking down a deeply complex, incredibly calculated double murder plot that completely shook a community. This isn't your standard true crime story. We're talking about a former federal law enforcement agent, a devastating betrayal, and a high-stakes courtroom clash that just recently reached its final dramatic conclusion. We're going to walk you through exactly how this scheme was built, the forensic evidence that blew the whole thing wide open, and the final sentencing. I want to hook you right away with the core facts here because they are absolutely chilling. A former IRS law enforcement officer literally catfished a complete stranger using a fetish website, lured that man to his home, and then stabbed his own wife 7 times in the neck. After that, he shot the stranger twice and tried to blame the whole horrifying scene on self-defense against a random intruder. And you know what the absolute darkest detail of all this is? While this entire deadly trap was springing upstairs, his 4-year-old daughter was right downstairs in the basement. Okay, so let's get right into the who and the why. To understand this web of deception, you have to know the players. We have 40-year-old Brendan Banfield, his 37-year-old wife, Christine, who, by the way, was a pediatric intensive care nurse, and their 25-year-old live-in au pair from Brazil, Juliana Peres Magalhães. According to prosecutors, Brendan and Juliana started having an affair, but there was a major catch. A divorce meant Brendan might lose custody of his little girl. So instead of just walking away from the marriage, a much, much darker plan was set into motion.
Prosecutors say Brendan and Juliana came up with a highly specific three-step scheme. Step 1. They built a totally fake online identity, literally posing as Christine on a fetish website. Step 2. They used that profile to lure a man to their home, promising him a very specific kind of sexual encounter, one that explicitly involved a knife. And Step 3. They would execute the murders and frame that unsuspecting stranger as a violent intruder. That stranger turned out to be 39-year-old Joseph Ryan. He had absolutely no connection to the family whatsoever. He walked into this trap completely blind.
So let's look at how the tragic morning of February 24th, 2023 actually played out. Joseph Ryan shows up at the Herndon home, fully expecting the encounter he'd been promised online. But the whole scene was entirely staged. The actual sequence of events, according to the prosecution, is just brutal. Brendan shoots Ryan. Then Brendan uses a kitchen knife to stab his wife Christine 7 times in the neck. And get this, prosecutors say Ryan actually brought that exact knife with him at Brendan's direction, thinking it was just a prop for the fetish encounter. Finally, Juliana shoots Ryan a second time.
Now, picture this. Police respond to a frantic 911 call and walk into an absolute scene of chaos. Upstairs, they find Joseph Ryan dead with gunshot wounds to the head and chest. Downstairs, there's Brendan Banfield kneeling over his bleeding wife with his hands on her neck. Brendan's initial story to the cops? He claims that he and Juliana had simply come home to find this random stranger, Ryan, already attacking Christine, and that they both had to shoot him to defend her. Brendan even went so far as to claim that Christine, while she was still conscious, actually instructed him to apply pressure to her wounds.
Which brings us to the million-dollar question. Was this actually self-defense against a home invader? On the surface, if you just hear the story of coming home to a horrific attack, it sounds like a plausible defense, right? But as investigators started digging into the forensic analysis, they immediately began finding cracks. The physical evidence at the scene just was not matching up with the spontaneous, heroic narrative that Brendan and Juliana were trying to sell. The hard, objective data told a completely different story. Here was the massive, glaring issue for Brendan. His DNA was never found on that kitchen knife. Nowhere. The only DNA they recovered from that murder weapon belonged to Christine and Joseph Ryan. This was like a giant puzzle piece that blew a hole right through their alibi. It perfectly backed up the prosecution's theory that Ryan was tricked into bringing the weapon himself, completely oblivious to the deadly role he and the knife were about to play. For months, the investigation is grinding away behind closed doors. And then, 8 months after the murders, the whole case flips on its head. Juliana gets arrested and is initially hit with a second-degree murder charge. But then, in 2024, she makes a deal. She pleads guilty to a downgraded manslaughter charge with one huge string attached. She has to fully cooperate and testify against Brendan. And wow, did her new account shatter their original story. She admitted the whole intruder thing was fake, the fetish profile was a setup, and that she and Brendan actually waited outside in a car with his daughter while the trap was set. Fast forward to January 2026, Fairfax County Circuit Court. This is the ultimate courtroom showdown. The 2 former lovers finally face off. Both Brendan and Juliana take the witness stand. And the stakes literally could not have been any higher. Prosecutors and Brendan's defense team actually agreed not to offer the jury any lesser homicide charges to fall back on. It was a massive all-or-nothing gamble for Brendan. A conviction for aggravated murder, or he walks away completely free. The jury had to weigh 2 completely opposite realities. Under oath, Brendan stuck to his guns, maintaining absolute innocence. He insisted he shot Ryan purely in self-defense after walking into an active nightmare. But then you have Juliana. She sat up there and detailed months of careful, calculated planning. The fake online profile, the staged scene, the entire scheme engineered specifically to eliminate Christine while making Joseph Ryan look like a deranged killer. 2. That is the exact number of aggravated murder counts the jury found Brendan Banfield guilty of. They got the case midday on a Friday, deliberated all through the weekend, and came back Monday, guilty on 2 counts of aggravated murder plus the firearm and child endangerment charges. Reporters in the courtroom noted that Brendan looked completely stoic when the verdict was read, just zero emotion.
Afterward, the Commonwealth's attorney didn't mince words, flat out calling Banfield's actions monstrous.
That brings us to June 5th, 2026, sentencing day. And here's the thing about Virginia state law. A conviction for aggravated murder leaves the judge with absolutely zero leeway. None. It carries a mandatory automatic sentence of life in prison without any possibility of parole. But before that sentence was officially locked in, the court had to hear from the people actually left behind in the wreckage of this plot.
Christine's sister, Danielle Hawker, stood up and delivered just a gut-wrenching victim impact statement. She talked about how her sister's murder fundamentally shattered her life. She painted this beautiful picture of Christine as a woman defined by selfless love. And she looked right at Brendan, contrasting that love with him, saying firmly that he will only ever be remembered for senseless evil. It was a moment that really anchored the heavy, emotional toll of this crime.
And Judge Penny Ascarate, she absolutely did not hold back either. She ripped into him for the deception layered on deception. She made it clear that the sheer level of cruelty and calculation it takes to spend months scheming to lure an innocent man into a death trap isn't just a momentary lapse of judgment or a crime of passion. She said plainly to the court that it reflects pure evil. She told Brendan she had absolutely no burden and zero hesitation in handing down that life sentence. So let's look at the aftermath. Where does everyone stand now? At 40 years old, Brendan Banfield is heading to the Virginia Department of Corrections to serve consecutive life sentences plus an extra 8 years for the gun and child endangerment charges. Short of a totally overturned conviction, he is never getting out. Meanwhile, Juliana, the au pair who flipped, was sentenced separately to 10 years. But with credit for time served and good behavior, it's expected she'll actually serve roughly 4 years.
Now, from a legal standpoint, what's next? Brendan is still claiming he's innocent, and he has 30 days from that sentencing to file an appeal. If we look at the defense strategy, they're almost certainly going to lean on two major factors. First, that complete lack of his DNA on the murder weapon gives them a realistic angle to challenge the physical evidence. Second, the prosecution relied heavily on a co-defendant who basically bought a later sentence with her testimony, opening the door for some serious credibility arguments. These are exactly the threads an appellate lawyer is going to pull on.
But honestly, while all the legal appeals and courtroom maneuvers play out, we have to end this explainer by talking about the true collateral damage here. Judge Asgarup had hit the nail on the head. There was an unspoken, entirely innocent victim in all of this. That 4-year-old little girl. She was sitting in a basement while her entire world was violently dismantled right above her. She's now left with no mother and a father who will die in a prison cell. It leaves us with a really haunting question to think about. When someone layers deception this deeply just to protect their own lifestyle, how do we even begin to measure the true cost paid by the innocent people left behind in the wreckage?